For the past few years, the Russian government has been painting Putin as Europe's main conservative, defender of traditional values and the like. Putin himself has also repeatedly pushed conservative talking points that are liked both within and beyond Russia. For example, he often speaks out about LGBT and religion. This public image has created a false impression among many that Putin has become the main conservative in the world, when in fact it's not the case. In this video, we will explore why Putin and his regime are anything but conservative. One of the core themes of conservatism is the issue of family and marriage. Putin himself has repeatedly addressed it, though in a rather peculiar context. For example, Putin fears that the traditional family structure is under attack from Western values that would force people to stop calling their parents mom and dad, and instead start saying parent number 1 and parent number 2. This also overlaps with the rhetoric on LGBT, but more on that later. These speculations have nothing to do with reality, yet they resonate with some people. At the same time, traditional family values face many challenges in Russia. It regularly ranks as the world's leading country in terms of divorce rates. On average, there are 4 divorces per 1,000 people each year, which is pretty high. Russia is on par with Kazakhstan, Belarus, and China. Divorce rates in the USA are also high, about 2 per 1,000 people each year. It is true that the lowest rates are seen in countries with predominantly conservative values like Ireland, Chile, Armenia, the Emirates, and others. So, in terms of divorces, Russia is actually one of the most non-conservative countries. Actual conservative societies discourage divorces or even outright ban them. The second extremely important issue in the context of family values is the issue of abortion. It always generates quite a bit of tension between the left and the right. In this regard, conservatives usually appeal to religion and argue that abortion is murder. It is forbidden among most believers. Just recently, we have seen heated discussions concerning the prohibition of abortion in Poland and the United States. In Poland, it resulted in mass protests, but the ban on abortion remained in place. The US government granted states the power to prohibit abortion, which a number of conservative states have already done. In countries with predominantly traditional values, abortion is generally prohibited altogether or heavily restricted. For example, they are allowed only in cases of rape or risk of life. Abortions are restricted in Poland, Texas, several Latin American countries, and virtually all Muslim countries. But in Russia, there are no serious restrictions on abortions. They can be done in the first 17 weeks of pregnancy. A similar condition is present in most European and post-Soviet countries. At the same time, year after year, Russia ranks high in the number of abortions. According to the latest data, on average, 53 abortions are performed per 1,000 women annually, which is the highest percentage in the world. For comparison, in the US, there are about 20 abortions per 1,000 women. The lowest rates found in countries where abortion is banned or significantly restricted. Among countries where abortion is legal, the rates are relatively low in Greece, Austria, and Croatia. So again, it turns out that Russia ranks above all other countries in terms of abortion, which does not correlate with the conservative values of its citizens. In 2020, more than 450 Russian women had an abortion. We should also mention Putin's personal family values. Throughout his life, Putin was married to Lyudmila, whom he divorced in 2013 after 25 years of marriage. He remains divorced and without a family ever since. Putin is extremely secretive when it comes to family matters. He does not discuss his children openly and does not show them in public. Countless investigations came to the conclusion that he has multiple daughters, but Putin does not want to acknowledge them and denies that they're his. Rather strange behavior for a custodian of traditional values. Throughout his life, there were multiple rumors concerning Kabayeva, his lover, who is 30 years younger than him and has several children, probably fathered by Putin. These relationships are carefully concealed and little is known about them. Overall, even on a personal level, Putin's family values are questionable at best. Let's move on and discuss religion and faith in Russia. According to a survey by See a World, only 34% of Russians consider themselves religious and regard faith to be an essential part of their lives, which is about 1 in 3 people. Similar numbers can be observed in many European countries such as Hungary, Belgium, and Germany. Europeans have a rather lukewarm attitude towards religion. in Europe there are less believers than anywhere in the world. The US is a more religious country, with 69% of citizens believing in God. The highest percentages tend to be in Muslim countries, where faith is crucial and in some cases the law itself is based on Islam. The most religious countries in the world are Bangladesh, Indonesia, Egypt, Senegal, and others. Overall, despite the government's appeal to faith, Russia is not that religious and not that different from most of European countries. As for Putin himself, he considers himself an Orthodox Christian. At the same time, Russia is famous for strange projects that contradict the traditional understanding of religion. For example, this is the main cathedral of the Russian armed forces. It's a mix of Soviet and imperial heritage of Russia. Never mind that building a church like that is a very strange endeavor. The cathedral itself is filled with communist iconography and at the same time supposed to represent the Orthodox faith, which is a stark contrast. One of Putin's favorite topics, which he often talks about and which draws the attention of the Western right, is LGBT. Putin has repeatedly spoken against LGBT propaganda and advocated for protection of traditional values. And lately, he's been mentioning it in almost every speech. For example, in his last one, he mentioned that he doesn't want mom and dad to be called parent number 1 and parent number 2. He also sees any non-traditional relationship as a perversion, and so on. So, back in 2013, Russia passed its first law prohibiting LGBT propaganda among minors. A similar law exists in Hungary, though it was passed later. According to this law, sex education classes involving the topic of non-traditional relationships are prohibited. Same-sex marriages and cohabitation agreements are also banned. And people with non-traditional sexual orientation cannot adopt children. In fact, a similar picture can be observed in the entire post-Soviet space, and in Eastern Europe as a whole. The majority of people there are still not ready for these changes. Those countries don't tolerate LGBT just the same. Therefore, despite Putin's animosity, Russia's position on LGBT is nothing unique. It is worth noting, though, that this rhetoric has indeed gained him some popularity with the right wing in the West. And lastly, we'd like to mention Putin's love for the Soviet Union despite its regular criticism. Putin keeps referring to the collapse of the Soviet Union as, quote, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe, and his policies seem to focus on reclaiming lost territories. That is not surprising, though. Putin served in KGB in the Soviet Union, and it collapsed when he was 39 years old, so he feels nostalgia toward that system, just like most of the Russians from that generation. His peers also remember Soviet times fondly, despite all the shortcomings. Putin served the former regime, and he laments the loss of the communist Soviet state, which is the primary reason for this ambiguous image of him as a conservative. Strangely enough, however, Putin often criticizes the Soviet Union, primarily Lenin's actions and policies. But Lenin's monuments are still being restored, and his mausoleum stands in the very heart of Moscow. Of course, the Russian government uses various populist methods that appeal to different social groups. Nevertheless, Putin does not even bother hiding his nostalgia for the Soviet Union. In conclusion, although Putin pretends to be a conservative leader, he does not personally adhere to traditional values. And Russia itself, where he has ruled for 22 years now, does not act like a conservative country on issues of family and religion. In many ways, all of Putin's quote-unquote conservatism is built around the criticism of LGBT. But if we look at European countries, then Russia's stance becomes mundane in comparison. This video was made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Boosty, and YouTube. If you like our content, please consider supporting us.